12:30. Welcome to our lunchtime session. My name is Dr Nicola Eccles. I am the head of mental health and wellbeing for On Wellbeing. We are a digital health solution. We work with organisations across the UK to support positive mental health across a diverse range of employees. We also have today Kate. So Kate, why don't you just jump right in and introduce yourself?
Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name's Kate Wood and I work at the University of Derby and lead on all things mental health and wellbeing in the workplace. So I've been working on the mental health and productivity pilot over the last 4.5 years, and we recently launched, when I say recently, it was last year now, launched the Work Health Hub, which is an online platform dedicated to health and wellbeing in the workplace. And that also allows us to work in a bespoke way, one-to-one with organisations to help them make sure they're creating the right culture and rolling out the right wellbeing initiatives.
Thank you. And that word culture, we're gonna come back to as one of our first points of today. So we're going to talk today about what we think, with our experience, me with a background in research around mental health, well-being, and sort of workplace and behaviour change, and then Kate with her knowledge, applied knowledge. We're going to come together and discuss what we think the key elements are that sometimes I think we might be missing. But just before we do that, let's just do a little bit of scene setting. Why are we here? Why is it so relevant? Why are we having this conversation? I think the conversation is becoming more relevant by the day rather than less relevant. This issue of mental health, across the spectrum of people and across the spectrum of mental health issues, continues to dominate the headlines, dominate our everyday experiences. I'm sure we've all got anecdotal experiences, dominate our lives. We're not managing, we're not coping, or many of us are not. And the recent Mental Health UK Burnout Report was a lovely summary of that. And if you haven't seen that, then if you click on our On Wellbeing LinkedIn pages, I refer back to it maybe last week or the week before, I think. What significance did that have? Burnout, now recognized by the World Health Organization as a syndrome. 9 in 10 adults in the last year say they experienced extreme or high levels of stress. But more significantly, 1 in 5 employees said that they took time off due to mental health issues. So we're all experiencing the impact of this. And for me, what we forget is that it isn't just the individual and the organization. The ripple effect of someone who is struggling is just, it's infinite, because the way that individual might receive feedback, the way they communicate, the emphasis on different elements of work that they're doing. There's so many intricate and complex effects of someone who's struggling. So we need to do all that we can to try to create a supportive space. So no longer are organizations, I don't think, saying, why are we doing this? We know we need to do it, but it's just difficult to see how. And there's so many things that organizations say to me, we've got it there, but no one's using it. Or, nothing seems to be changing, although we've had this in place for some time, and I think the questions that are going round and round are, well, what's effective then? What can we do? And what's the best way to roll it out? And how do we engage our colleagues? So the first point I want to make a little bit, because we just came across that word culture, is the difference between a strategy and culture. So I was at a conference a few months ago, and one of the most impactful statements that someone made was, there is no point in a wellbeing strategy without a wellbeing culture. The culture must come first. Otherwise, the strategy is a waste of everybody's time. Kate, do you want to speak to that a little bit with your experience recently about culture, strategy? Because we're always trying to write our wellbeing strategies, aren't we? And we're busy doing it. But what are we wasting our time?
You're not wasting your time, but I think certainly the work we do with organisations, it's got to be the culture. And to write a strategy, you need to know what your staff want. It needs to mirror your values, your vision, your mission. But just having a strategy and then collecting dust on a shelf, and we've just actually I've delivered a session this morning on the very topic of writing your wellbeing strategy. That's great. Yes, of course we need a wellbeing strategy. We need to give it to new starters. We need to have it there quite often as audit requirements. But the real test of a wellbeing strategy is if your staff can feel it and it's visible. It's not just about having a policy document, it's about being visible, and it has to be that golden thread that runs through an organisation. So culture is really difficult to change, especially if it's not a great one to begin with. And that has to come from the top, that has to come from senior leadership. So it's great to have a written strategy, but I think that the culture needs to be one within which people feel psychologically safe, they feel they've got a voice, they feel that if they answer a survey, something's going to actually happen with the results, because I'm sure we can all on the call relate and have memories of filling in countless surveys and then you never hear a dicky bird about the results at all. And you just think, well, what's the point? And that's where you get complete disengagement from your staff, complete disengagement. So a wellbeing culture has to be your number one priority. And how are we going to feel and see that culture within an organisation? Then write your strategy around that. So that would be the order I would do things in.
You make a really sort of insightful point there about surveys, and you fill them in and then nothing changes, or there's a lack of communication around what's going to change the results. I think that's really critical for us to touch on for everyone on the call today. And that goes back to one of our key elements of behavior change, and that is that you're not gonna do anything if you don't trust the voice that it's coming from. So if someone is giving mixed messages, whether it's a parent or a CEO of an organization, about this might happen or it hasn't happened, and here's a survey, what would you like? And then, but we're not really communicating about how that's what the fallout of that is. And I think that's one of the most important things, because then people are not going to, behavior change, culture comes down to behavior change, right? So, because we know not every, but many workplace cultures could do with improving around mental health, around vulnerability, around psychological safety. And you can't start to change unless you trust the voice that's talking to you. So that trust is critical. And I mean, there is no answer to this, so I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, Kate. But if someone's listening who thinks that they're in an organization where the culture is quite maybe mixed, it's never all bad, is it? Mixed, and they're not quite sure what to do about pockets of changing culture. Would there be any top tips around changing culture that you've learned or have spoken about with some of your organizations that you've been working with?
Yeah, I definitely think getting external support helps.
Okay.
Don't feel like you've got to do it all on your own, because we always find in organisations there's one person flying the wellbeing flag and they're really passionate about it, and then they are hit with like closed doors. They just can't get past sort of first base, if you like. So whenever we go into organisations and support, we go in at the top level, because there's got to be buy-in. Now, I hate talking about money and mental health. It just doesn't go together for me. However, when you are talking to that top level, they do want to know what's the return on investment, for investing in all these wellbeing initiatives. For every pound we spend, we get a £5.30 return. Those are the latest return on investment figures. And I think, so getting that buy-in and building your business case for why wellbeing is so, so important, that's key. And presenting that to your senior leadership team. Even if you've just got one person on the senior leadership team that's bought into it, that will help you and it will speak volumes. I think other tips, if you do surveys, if you are asking for support and feedback from staff, always have in your mind the concept of you said we did. So once you've got the results back, communicate those results back to staff. So thank them for completing the survey, for example, and say these are the main themes that came out of the survey. And all the organisations we've worked with in the last 4.5, 5 years culture is always one of the top ones that comes out as something that needs to be addressed. Yeah, in any sector. So culture, and whether it's a blame culture, whether it's not psychologically safe, it's always that top one. And the other top one is communication or lack of. And those two things go hand in hand, especially with what we're talking about in terms of developing a really good strategy and developing a really healthy and inclusive culture. Communication is key. So even if you haven't got anything to communicate that. So
Yeah.
use what we did, say, this is what we have, these were your suggestions, and this is what we're going to do about it. So share your action plan with all staff. Say you're going to regularly update them on it and make sure that you do. That will build trust, and that will build that loyalty as well. And it will also boost your employee engagement as well. If you do nothing, you're just going to be stuck in the same position, or if not worse.
And I think perhaps it's that lack of continuity, is that there's a stop-start input with mental health, well-being in the organization. That's because, let's be honest, it's not an organization's key key thing, is it? It's a side issue. So okay, so one of the first things we've talked about here in the foundations of mentally healthy organization is really understanding that culture comes first before strategy. There's no point having a strategy until you have a culture, and a culture comes through communication and trust. Senior leaders buy in, even if there's just one, you said. And another thing we talked about was getting some external support in. So actually accepting that perhaps spending a little bit on bringing someone on board. The other reason that often works with organizations that I've spoken to is that it maybe feels like it isn't just in the organization, that and then they feel a little bit more confident in, or colleagues feel a bit more confident that maybe something's going to happen. So building trust, psychological safety, and communication is key, and losing this stop-start approach. So that's a really good top point for us to think about. The next thing I want to talk about, and I talk about this a lot, so if you've been on any of my webinars, you'll recognize the term, and the term is the PRA, and it's called the Personal Resource Allocation Model. And it was developed by someone called Grawich back in 2010. And I think it's the most unattended element of workplace well-being. And I think there's so much more we could do on it. And in a nutshell today, in the next 5 minutes, what is it about? It's this: we're one person. We're not a work and a home person. So this concept of a work-life balance is actually really reductionist, because we need to talk about integration of work and life a lot more. And we need to recognize that work enriches life, but so too does our life enrich work. So trying to keep this door shut is becoming increasingly difficult for people, especially because of our hybrid nature of working and the fact we're working all the time. So most of us are in a little bit of a mishmash. We're having a bit of a kind of moment of disorder in our minds around, the work life. Oh, I've got to pick the kids up, but I'm supposed to be at work, but I'm working at home, so I can't do that. That's a bit complex, confusing, and we're not quite where the boundaries are all blurred, and a lot of us are struggling with that. Now, personal resource allocation, just to come back to that term, how am I tying this in? Because we all only have one set of resources every day. So they're not finite and they're not limitless. And if all our resources are used up in a small amount of our day on something that's perhaps not work, as an employer, you might say, well, that doesn't, you've still got to show up and do it. Yes, of course you have, but let's recognize that resources ebb and flow, and we're not giving a robotic level of commitment across the year. That's just so inappropriate to expect that. Instead, let's relish the fact that we are, maybe able to put so much more in and then a little bit less at another time. And the reason that's important in relation to the model, in relation to the burnout report, the statistics we just received, is this: what are the top reasons that are creating burnout? Funnily enough, not actually the work itself. Yes, communication, stress at work, that all creates it to a point, but it's things like a lack of sleep, financial worries, relationship problems, caring responsibilities. And it's exacerbated if 9 hours or 8 hours of the day you're trying to keep that, from even touching what you're doing. So the personal resource allocation model, why I think that's worth talking about as a foundation of a mentally healthy organization is this. We have our appraisals, our 6-monthly appraisals with our line manager, which is so, the power balance there is all wrong too. Instead, let's do a resource allocation discussion. What's coming up for you? How is it going? And you have to, if you're listening and you're perhaps a manager or a CEO, the belief isn't that people don't want to go to work. Everyone's not trying to get away from work. That's not the case. People want to do a good job. They want to do their best at work. But this sort of strange way that we're trying to sort of, keep ourselves away, our lives away from it, isn't really helping us. So the personal resource allocation model would be my sort of second tip: culture, personal resource allocation, which is about ensuring that the whole person is there at work and not fearing that that's going to mean the person just suddenly goes off and spends the day at home doing all their jobs. That's not necessarily the case. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that, Kate, or if you've heard of that concept before.
All the time, because like you say, Nicola, we're not robots and we've all got stuff going on, haven't we? But if you think about it, we spend most of our waking hours at work, whether that's in the office, hybrid, wherever. So to have to try and wear a mask for that amount of time and just trudge on and carry on doing what you're doing, that's detrimental to your physical and mental health and your emotional well-being. So, and we see it such a lot that people are frightened to speak to line managers about something that might be impacting on their work. If they've got caring responsibilities, if they've got worries with children, elderly parents, if they've got financial problems, it's going to have an impact. We can't be firing on all cylinders all the time. And we speak to so many people that are frightened to go and offload to their manager. Now, that's due to a lot of factors, and that this is not all down to an organisation and the culture, because there's a lot of stigma still attached to mental health and well-being and all of that, which we know. So a lot of that is our perceived stigma of how we think we're going to be received and treated. But a lot of it is due down to the culture within an organisation. And that's why it's so important to have that trust and that psychological safety, so that people can feel that they can bring their whole selves to work, that they can bring their authentic, true self to work and speak to their line manager. And that the line manager isn't going to go, well, crikey, you can't do your job, or let's take things off you. No, let's just sit and have a conversation about, okay, how is that impacting you at the moment? How can we support you? And those managers that carry those stereotypes around with them, like, oh, so and so is struggling, so don't give it to them to do, or they're not capable of doing their job as well now. Well, who has said that? Actually, lots of research shows that the more support we give people, if they are going through a difficult time, same as if anybody's got any disabilities, identified disabilities, hidden or otherwise, they're actually more loyal to an organisation and they take less time off sick. So giving back, supporting the employee is going to make them work better for you anyway.
I think one of the most important things to note there is that by just the very act of sharing in that in that personal resource allocation discussion, you are actually solving some of the problems. I mean, that's the foundation of counselling. You're talking it through and you're offloading, and suddenly it doesn't feel perhaps like such a big deal, because remember, I mean, if you actually look into the resource allocation model and the research, sometimes it's perceived sort of resource issues rather than actual. So it's like, okay, well, let's break this down. So you think you're going to take a really long time to write a report. Well, what's your kind of history of that? Why do you think that? Let's try and be more positive. Perhaps it won't. It's trying to break down some barriers. And also, I think with this, PRA resources, understanding that we're not robots, again, like you've just said, it's up to leadership to walk the talk and say, well, hey, I'm going off for a couple of days because you know what, I've got to sort this thing out, and then I'm going to be back firing on all cylinders. Because what's one of our biggest problems in the workplace right now? The issue of people being at work but not being there, right? And
Yeah.
having so many distractions now we work from home. I mean, I talked about that on a webinar the other week. So many of us are, feel so much guilt and shame because there's notifications popping off, there's laundry to do, and we're all pretending we're not doing it. So it's actually, let's be more honest about the reality of hybrid working, right? But how can we work better? Maybe this means that sending an email at 8 p.m. isn't a bad thing anymore, because that sort of old school thought around work-life balance, for many of us now, clocking off at 5 on the dot isn't actually always working. Maybe we need to do a little bit here and a little bit there because we've got other stuff going on. But for some, the clocking off still works. So it's, well, who are you working with, and allowing that flexibility a little bit, I think, obviously depending on the job.
Yeah, of course. And, we shouldn't forget we've got a new flexible working policy coming out in April, which is going to certainly take some integrating, I think, into a lot of workplaces. A lot of workplaces are already, they're offering a lot of flexibility. And I have to say those are the organisations that are getting the best productivity. So I
Yes,
think there's going to be a lot more.
autonomy. Yeah, when
Yeah.
people know, so the research around the resources shows that when people feel that they're in control of their resources and they
Yeah.
can put them where they need to, then they're more likely to feel better about themselves. It means they're doing a better job about everything.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I think so some of our top tips on the foundations of mentally healthy organization today so far, we've talked about, the culture being the critical thing, and that coming through, psychological safety, communication, trust, and you said we did. And then we've talked about resource allocation, recognizing that we're not robotic people, recognizing in your teams the ebb and flow of energy, and talking to people about resources, being open and honest about it, and leadership being vulnerable too. Another thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is skill development, and this is for life itself, which includes work. And that is that most of us in our middle age, or I don't know, sort of 30, 40 plus, well, haven't necessarily got the tools and skills to deal mentally with the challenges of life. And we know post-COVID that that's become even more challenging for many of us. And so the demand on mental health services, the 175% increase, obviously isn't being met. So there's a massive gap somewhere with people who are struggling, who, and they're not able to get the support they need. Now, organizations are in this place at the moment where they think, oh God, well that's us then. More counselors, what can we provide? But the thing is, for many people who are still in that hard to reach category, going directly to a therapist isn't necessarily what they're going to do. So what we need to do, which is what we do on Wellbeing in the app, really, is we need to teach people skills. Because in an organization, HR are not the resort. They can't keep giving more, and people can't keep giving more themselves. So actually, people need to learn the skills so they have higher self-worth. They can set boundaries, they can take care of themselves, and then we can stop some of the problems in the workplace at the beginning. Now, someone might listen and say, all right, so we're just, we're placing the individual as the one that's responsible again. We're just letting the organization get off with their, overworking culture. No, I'm not saying that, but that culture isn't going to disappear overnight that so many of us have. So we have to change the people, because the people can say, no, this is how I need to work, and this is how I'm going to be effective. And when you have higher levels of self-worth and boundaries, I think that's much better. And I think that's an area not a lot of people do enough on. What do you think, Kate? Like helping people to learn skills?
Yeah, and this is why I like the On Wellbeing app, actually, because it's got to be joint responsibility. So whenever we go in and deliver workshops to organisations, yes, our focus is workplace wellbeing, but it's not solely the workplace's responsibility. Us as individuals, we have to take responsibility for our own health and well-being. And I always say that there's very little things in life that we can control, but what we absolutely can control is how we respond to situations. And so we're always going to encounter stressful situations at work, at home, wherever. So we really do need to do the inner work and learn different strategies to help boost our resilience, all those sorts of things. I do think work have got a place in supporting that and supporting individuals reach that conclusion themselves. So quite often we'll go in and do workshops, yes, with managers around how to start conversations around mental health and wellbeing and how to support staff, but we also go in and target the individuals within an organisation and say, these are some of the skills that you can use and strengthen in order to help you stand a fighting chance about meeting some of these challenges and equipping you with the skills in how to deal with them. Because we're all different. We've all got our different maps of the world, and it depends on our upbringing and our resilience and previous experiences and all those sorts of things. So the workplace absolutely is in a great position. And I too, Nicola, worry about people that do go to the doctors, even get put on a waiting list, and then the waiting list is goodness knows how many years long. What happens to those individuals between that time? And that's a really risky time for me. I really, really worry about that. And I think, mental health services need much more resource and much more money to do that. But I also think the workplace is in a really, really good opportunity, a good place, sorry, to really invest in individuals, because you will only reap the rewards from that. You invest in your staff, you will have a loyal team, absolutely.
Absolutely. So it's like a captive audience. You're in pole position. That's where people spend most of their time. And so, it is a no-brainer in that sense. Of course, we've just talked recently about the cost benefit analysis. Yeah. So the point is that, I think talking about skill development in individuals is actually should be a relief to HR, should be a relief to organizations, because I'm saying you're not you can provide a resource, you're not the resource, you're not the answer. Individuals it's only going to change when individuals change, and that's how culture changes too. So when we help people to learn and develop skills around, past trauma, resilience, coping, reducing stress, anxiety, then you're going to get a body of people who are able to manage work better, to be more effective in their work. What we have right now is a lot of people who are struggling and feeling a lot of guilt and shame and confusion and boundary sort of blurring with their working, or at least that's, I'm talking to a lot of people right now who are feeling like that.
No, absolutely.
So we've got the culture changing, that's critical. We talked about that, and I'll do a little LinkedIn sum up post summarizing all our points in a little while. We've got the PRA, we've got the resource allocation issue, we've got developing skills in individuals. And then one of the other points we thought we'd talk about, Kate, and maybe you can give us some examples, is the difficulty for leaders and managers who are so pressed with work, outcomes, demands on them, but also have to somehow walk the talk. And I think you said that there was a few who you did feel walk the talk in your experience, and I don't know whether you're able to give us some examples of those.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think there's lots of ways that senior leadership can show that they walk the talk. I think investing in individuals, as we've just said, is one of them. But I've worked with a couple of organisations where senior leaders have actually exposed their own vulnerability. Now, I'm not saying this is right for everybody. This is just an example of where they've spoken about their own challenges with poor mental health, lived and living experience. And I'm talking of like chief execs and quite senior people. And that not only means that they are actually human, which is always refreshing to hear, because I think we think that, senior leaders are up there, they never get stressed, they do the job and they don't understand all the pressures that we're going through. They're human, the same as everybody else, And when we talk about, or when senior leaders talk about their own living experience and share their own vulnerabilities, it actually strengthens the connection between them and their team. It helps to remove barriers. It helps to embed trust and loyalty, because actually staff go, oh my gosh, I never thought so. So-and-so would be struggling with mental health. This has actually made me more likely to disclose my own struggles, if that may be the case. So there's some really lovely examples, especially when perhaps organisations have refreshed their wellbeing strategy. It's great refreshing those and being audited. You have to refresh those every so often. But actually, chief execs have provided like an overview at the beginning or an introduction, a reason why that strategy is being reviewed.
Mhm.
Why is it important to them as an organisation? But also, why is it important to them as an individual, as a chief exec, as a senior leader?
Yeah.
Why is it important to them? And sharing their own experiences or speaking from the heart, that absolutely, it rings true with so many more people.
So showing vulnerability, we know, is really key for psychological safety, and that element of showing people, and we really struggle with this, I think, that two things can be true at the same time. You can be
Absolutely.
struggling with your mental health and performing at work. You can be struggling with your mental health and in a good position at work. You can outwardly look, and you can be happy and struggling with your mental health. Like
Yeah.
it's that we, we're very keen as humans to make things it's this or that, but actually,
Yeah,
for the most part in life, two things are true at the same time. Um,
exactly.
so showing vulnerability is really important. What else in terms of practice do you think for
Mm.
senior leaders? I mean, remember, there's this conflict, isn't there? Because I just said a minute ago, is, sending an email at 8 p.m., you know, there's that question thrown out, I guess, to everybody. Is that a bad thing or not? Well, it isn't for some people because, that might be their hour where they're catching up because they used the time earlier. But for others, that might feel like an infringement. So
Mhm.
what do senior leaders, have you got any experience, Kate, of how they work? It's like, how do you work?
Yeah, yeah. So senior leaders, or at least the ones where I think, oh my gosh, that's really good practice. For some people, I mean, I'm one of them. Sending that email at 8 o'clock is one less worry. It's good for my well-being if I could just get that bit off my chest. But a lot of senior leaders can have something on the bottom of their email I've seen where it says, I'm sending this outside of my normal working hours, but I do not expect a response outside of yours. And I think that's a really nice boundary. It's respecting other people's boundaries. It's acknowledging that you're doing it. Okay, that's fine. But also that there's not an expectation that people do the same. Because we look to our peers, don't we, for how to behave and how to act
Very
in
good.
an organisation. And I just think some senior leaders, I mean, I know some of the ones at the university, and I think, goodness gracious, you're working till goodness knows what time. I know that they wouldn't expect me to be working till 11 o'clock because they've got that little caveat on the bottom of their email, or they respect those boundaries. I also think senior leaders taking a lunch break is an amazing message, and having that protected time in their calendars and making that visible for staff to
Difficult,
see.
isn't it? I mean, that lunch break has become almost null and void for most of us,
It's
hasn't
an
it? But then I
extra
suppose if someone doesn't take one in order to finish earlier, but then the trouble there is we need to take frequent breaks from a physical and mental health perspective. So that is important. Okay, so like setting boundaries and being clear about this is how I'm working, but it doesn't have to be how you work. So that goes back to our point about flexible working. Well, let's see what happens when the new
Yeah.
um, you know, flexible working bill comes in. But so senior leaders walking the talk is something that I think
Mhm.
is and then also it's another pressure on senior leaders. Oh my God, and I have to look like I'm being mentally healthy, and it feels like one more thing for them to do. But I think the benefits are, significant in terms of that clarity.
Definitely.
And we're all struggling to be vulnerable, I think, because we still live in that space of, if I say this about myself, I'll look less than. And one
Yeah.
place we don't want to look less than, I've still got my dad's kind of words ringing in my ear, don't let anyone at work know anything about, just keep it all together. Um, and, I know a lot of people still argue that point, but I think we know from, the research that actually the vulnerability is the way forward because it helps everybody else. Um,
Definitely.
so just recapping them, we've talked about, I'm writing it all down, this is why I keep looking down. We've talked about the difference in culture and strategy, making sure you've got the culture there. We talked about the personal resource allocation, recognizing we're not robots. We talked about developing skills. We've talked about senior leaders walking the talk. What does that mean and what does it look like? And finally, let's just touch on the hard to reach, because this is I always talk about reaching the hard to reach, because for me, it's just so critical. A lot of the people accessing wellbeing and mental health strategies are already going to the gym, reading
Yeah.
self-help books, eating pretty well. That's not to say they're not going to benefit from it, but how do we reach the people whose lives are so consumed with worry and anxiety from the minute they get up, with caring responsibilities or their own poor health, or money worries, a day at work, and then coming back to the same non-stop, all the things that have to get done, go to bed, get up and do it again. These are the people that I am determined that we reach in some way with our strategy. It is so incredibly difficult because
Yeah.
it is down. Here's the list of things that they need to worry about, and mental
Mm.
health and well-being is down here. It's way down.
Mm.
Now I think reaching hard to reach can be done through providing support for them to for people to access in the at midnight in their own time. It's not a thing at work, because that's not something everyone always wants to do. Kate, what would you say about reaching the hard to reach? And I know we've both discussed at length the sharp end of that, people that may have taken their own life, and
Mm.
nobody knew that they were struggling. And how can we reach everybody?
I think it's really difficult because I don't like saying that anything is mandatory in the workplace in terms of like mandatory training. But I've seen it work so many times. So one big organisation that we are working with has made this specific training workshop that we are delivering mandatory for all staff. And the power that that has for the hard to reach is just amazing. So you will get people in the room sat like this, not wanting to be there. They know it. They've got other things to be worrying about. They don't need to be looking at their own health and well-being, like you said, Nicola. I was going with, let's just put your own oxygen mask on first. Yeah. Because you're worrying about all of this stuff. You can't do any of that if you're not healthy, fit, mentally well, physically well yourselves. So although I tend to try and steer away from mandatory training, I do think it has merit, because you are going to
Interesting.
get everybody then. And even if they don't participate, and even if they don't, they sit there reluctant, something is going to go in. And I've
Yeah,
seen so many examples of it going in,
interesting.
you know.
I think that's really interesting, and it's just there's so many thoughts coming to my head now. And if you've got anything, if anyone listening has got any thoughts on mandatory training, it's so Marmite, isn't it? Mandatory training. But I can
Yes,
see your point, because I know from behavior change that the drip, drip, drip. It's good. Something's going to go in, but then there's like if someone's there and they don't want to be, but maybe this is like a no smoking in the office policy. It's like you might not want to be, but you've got to listen. You've got to be
yeah.
here. Yeah.
I mean, mandatory training, that's not the be all and end all.
No,
That's
of
not
course
how we
not.
get to
It was
hard
just
to
one
reach
point about how
forward.
hard to
Just
reach.
yeah, and you are right, it is like Marmite. But I think that other ways that organisations can reach the hard to reach is by having the same messages in very different ways. So reach out to
Absolutely.
different people's
Good.
creativity,
Yes.
because learning style, how
Hmm.
do people absorb information?
Hmm.
It's great having posters up, but they're not going to reach everybody. It's
No.
great having an app. It's not going to reach
No,
everybody.
absolutely.
I also think, and this is something that has been discussed in government recently, about making mental health first aiders mandatory in all organisations. I don't agree, because I
Well,
think it's a tick box thing. Again, it's tick box.
what the issue with mental health first aid, and if anyone is has been trained with the MHFA qualification, this is not to put it down at all, but there's
No.
got it works for some people. Again, one size doesn't fit all. Many
Mhm.
people do not want to talk to someone at work about what's going on. So
Yeah.
a mental health first aider in itself isn't going to work for quite a lot of people,
No.
because they're it's as humans, that vulnerability of talking to someone at work who maybe you don't know that well, if maybe you've got a bit of an
Mhm.
issue with them, or maybe they're from another department and they know somebody that knows you, that knows your
Yeah.
husband, that and you're just like, oh, I don't want that around me. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so you made some good points there, because you talked about mandatory training, which could probably sets a number of thoughts off with everybody. You talked about
Mhm.
accessible options and making sure that it's you know, there's a different range of people for different you know, different messages, same message in different ways, and
Sure.
making it accessible for people. Um,
Yeah.
and recognizing, you know, the biggest issue, isn't it? And we'll just sort of talk about this a minute, because I know we want to open up to any questions. One of the biggest issues is time. So,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, let's not forget that a huge elephant in the room. Most of us are like, when have we got time to do this, right?
Yeah.
So that, I mean, okay, I'm going to sort of be selling the app here, but that's one reason why an app works. You do it in your own time if you've
Of
got any
course.
time later. But, you know, how do workplaces really give people the time to do the things they need to
Mm.
do? I mean, what's your, if you've got any examples of organizations that have done that well, Kate?
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's giving. I think this is a twofold really, and I'll be quick because I know you want to open up for Q&A. But organisations need to make the time to tackle this. And actually, over the last 4.5 years, the one bit of consistent feedback that's come out is that they've liked us holding their hand to roll all these things out, because you can't do it all on your own. And if you've got like a critical friend, which is what probably we act as, you know, again, this is not selling what the work we do, but I'm saying this is from all the research we've done and the actual physical work we've done with organisations. They like somebody external to work with because they haven't got the time. But it means that they're accountable and they know they're driving it forward. In terms of individuals, what I've seen, so I've seen some amazing best practice from organisations across different sectors, I have to say. So I'm talking NHS, I'm talking construction, engineering. I noticed the lovely Graham on the call today, who I've been working with Graham for goodness me, years now, and he's probably sick of the sight of me. But
I'm sure
you've
he
got
isn't.
really, I'm sure, I'm hoping he's not. But you know, you've got amazing organisations that give staff time. They allocate time out of the staff day to take part in training, to improve their own skills, to go walking. They do lunch and learns,
Oh,
walk
yeah,
and talk, all those
totally.
sorts of things. Now, that will often take a bit of persuading, because it's like, oh my God, how much business are we losing if we're allowing all staff to go and do this? Just go back to the return on investment. You know, by investing in your staff, giving them an extra bit of a lunch break, or by giving them time to take a wellbeing day, or to do an activity that, you know, by encouraging them to do that, you're only going to reap the rewards, you
Of
know?
course. And we talked about how many people are sitting at work
Mm.
for, you know, a proportion of the day, perhaps not really working effectively, or, you know, just flailing, being so busy but ineffective. And I can be guilty of that myself. I think, God, what have I actually done? I've like responded to everything all day long, but I've never actually got
Yeah.
the gritty sort of elements that I needed to get done. So yeah, there's lots to be taught. There's lots to say about actually stopping, pausing, taking time out to come back and be more effective. Okay, we've kind of run out of time. I'm gonna you know, we've taught so many things: culture, resources, skill development, senior leaders walking the talk, reaching the hard to reach. Those are our top tips for creating a mentally healthy organization before we even think about spending money on the gym memberships and the yoga and the, you know, the fruit or the extras, which are all great, don't get me wrong, but they're not necessarily going to have a sustained you know, sustained solution. So there's no comments in the chat yet, but there are a few of us in this call, so I don't know if anyone, I know you may not want to, you may be just digesting everything, but if anyone's got any questions they want to ask, or problems or issues they've got with anything we said, that maybe it's not realistic, then please type something as I'm waffling, as I'm filling here, because it would be great to hear from you. And you know, if you don't, then please contact me at on Wellbeing, or of course Kate at the Work Health Hub. And what I hope you're going to take away from this today, whatever your role or position is just to take stock of these foundation bricks of what's going to start to make real changes. You know, as I said at the top of this call today, the statistics are not going away. You know that people are struggling. I know it. We talk to them every day. And, you know, we've got to keep, we've got to keep pressing on, and we've got to keep looking and refreshing and think about what we can do to support everybody.
I've just popped my contact details in the chat as well, Nicola, just in case anybody wants to, and Graham's wants to look into the PRA as well, as it
Yeah,
looks like.
definitely. It's a piece of research. I'm happy to send something to you. I think I might have your email, Graham, from an earlier communication we had. So, yeah, maybe we'll try and send you that paper. Thanks to everybody. It's been great to see you today on the call. Really pleased you took some time out. And you know, that's what we've got to do. I think sometimes we've just got to stop and breathe, haven't we? The world is, you know, throwing things at us all the time. We need to stop and think clearly about it. So thanks from myself, thanks to everybody for being on today. And also to Kate, of course. I think you've got so much to bring to this chat with all your experience, Kate. So thank you for joining me today. I'll also recap this and put this out on Wellbeing on LinkedIn. Thank you so much. Okay, everybody.
See you all soon.
Friday.
Take care.